Jason Kenney is preparing to take Alberta's reins from Rachel Notley, who soon becomes the leader of the official opposition. The two met today at Government House in Edmonton to discuss the transition of power after Kenney secured a majority government in Tuesday's election.
I truly appreciate the commitment and public service, the great ability and intelligence that Premier Notley has brought to the service of Albertans in the past 4 years.
I have maintained, as you know, that my approach all along was moving us in the right direction, that we were closer than ever. The Premier-elect is going to take a different approach, one he says that will get results. Now, of course, I wish him the best on the pipeline because that's what we need to have happen for all Albertans.
Kenney and his United Conservative government will be sworn in on April 30th. He's expected to possibly meet with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau shortly thereafter. What will likely dominate that first meeting is the fate of the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. Today, the federal government announced that a final decision on the project will be delayed from May to June, saying it needs more time to consult with Indigenous communities. So how is Alberta reacting to that move? Jason Kenney is the leader of the United Conservative Party and Alberta's incoming premier. He joins me now from Edmonton. Hi, Mr. Kenney. Nice to see you. Congratulations on your victory.
Thanks very much. I hope you had a good time in Alberta covering it.
I did, as always. I wanted to start off by asking you about what we heard from the federal government today. They have announced that they're extending the deadline for a decision on TMX from May 22nd to June 18th. The feds are saying it's because Indigenous groups have told them more time is needed to complete the Phase 3 consultations, essentially the Indigenous part of the Indigenous portion of the consultations. Are you satisfied with that reasoning?
Yes, the Prime Minister gave me a heads up about this yesterday when he called me to congratulate us on our electoral success. I understand that the federal government needs to be absolutely sure that it completes the Indigenous consultation in a way that will pass muster with the courts. I think what Albertans find frustrating is that we're still talking about this now. This is a pipeline that was supposed to be halfway done by now. But we'll hold them to this, a mid-June cabinet decision, and we'll continue to try to build growing public support for pipelines across Canada. Did
he provide you with any assurances on the content of that decision or the June timeline, the extended timeline? Like, did he say it will be then for sure?
Well, yeah, he was, I think, pretty clear that he'd hoped that this will all be done by, I think, mid-June in terms of the federal decision. And I can tell you as a former federal minister that I understand the federal cabinet has to, can't pre-make its decision because it will undoubtedly be subject to judicial review. The same groups that have opposed and delayed and obstructed pipelines all along will undoubtedly challenge any future decision. And that's one of the reasons, Vasi, why we have a strategy to push back against the foreign-funded special interests funding and fueling the anti-Canadian energy campaign.
Before I ask you about that, the original order in council that approved TMX back in 2016 actually stipulated the cap on emissions in the oil sands was kind of part of the justification allowing for approval. You've promised, and you did promise during the campaign, to remove that cap. By doing so, are you giving the federal government a reason to say no to this pipeline?
The two things are completely unrelated. You know, this notion of social license that we would trade punishing policies on Alberta for a pipeline have been proven completely to be a complete failure with the cancellation of Northern Gateway, the killing of Energy East, the surrender to Obama's veto on Keystone, Bill C-69, the No More Pipelines law, the tanker ban C-48, the endless delays on Trans Mountain. So we don't buy that. Look, Alberta, the oil sands are nowhere near hitting that cap. So this is it's basically a theoretical, not a real practical question.
So you don't agree with it even in theory, though? Because I'm referring directly to the order in council back in 2016, and I'm just wondering if by removing that, you're giving them a reason to say no. Obviously, you don't believe that they go hand in hand. It's clear the federal government does.
Listen, we hope and expect that the federal government will make its decision based on the federal court decision, which was very narrowly focused on marine animal impacts as well as supplementary Indigenous consultations, nothing to do with the oil sands.
They've also talked, obviously, in the same vein about a climate plan for the country and how that the two go hand in hand with growing resources or getting resources to new markets. I know you fundamentally disagree with that, but I'm wondering if you will continue with the same kinds of targets that have been set. I mean, their overall national target is built upon individual provinces having their own targets. Are you going to reduce, for example, the targets set by Rachel Notley?
Well, we have a common sense plan in our platform to impose a levy on major industrial emitters that would reduce CO2 output by about 45 megatons from Alberta. That gets us to about 85% of the way where the NDP was going, without a punishing retail carbon tax. We're going to come forward with other additional measures as a government. So we will support ambitious efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But at the same time, Vasi, we need to recognize that we could shut down Alberta's economy tomorrow, and it would make no measurable impact in the global emissions output. The single best thing we could do to contribute to reducing global emissions would be to get more Canadian liquefied natural gas to Asian markets so they can convert their power production from coal to natural gas. That's a real practical measure that we will be supporting.
You know, though, that the argument has been made before that in the grand scheme of global emissions, Canada doesn't make that much of a difference. But the argument on the other side is, if you want other countries to do their part, you need to do your own as well. That's why we support a levy on major emitters, and we'll be taking other action. But at the end of the day, when will you announce the other action?
As a government in the months to come. But as I say, we have a plan that, without punishing people for heating their homes and driving to work, gets us 85% of the way to what the NDP's targets were, which are compliant with the federal targets. But listen, if we're really focused on not just economic masochism here, but actually reducing global greenhouse gas emissions, then let's get more Canadian liquefied natural gas to Asian markets. I know the so-called green organizations don't want to talk about it because I think they're more focused on beating up on Canada as opposed to actually reducing global emissions. We're focused on the latter.
You also, in the campaign, made a promise to hold a referendum on equalization if there were. You stipulated a couple of reasons that would require that. If by June 18th there is not an approval by Cabinet for TMX, does that necessitate, from your perspective, holding that referendum?
No, what we've said in our platform is that if we don't have substantial progress on the completion of a coastal pipeline by 2021, and if we don't have the federal government withdrawing just devastating policies like Bill C-69, then we will be prepared to hold a referendum on Section 36 of the Constitution, which is the principle of equalization, in October of 2021, concurrent with our municipal elections. And I note that Premier Moe has floated the idea today of joining Alberta in that. So what we're trying to do is use that as quite transparently as a point of real leverage, frankly taking a page out of Quebec's playbook and how they've been so effective at asserting their interests in the Federation to the top of the national agenda. But we won't go with that right away. It's a point of leverage. We hope that we can see a coastal pipeline completed before then.
So what if the coastal pipeline is completed before then, but the government passes Bill C-69? Would you still pursue a referendum?
Well, we'll look at the circumstances as they develop. We've laid down those two criteria. And the bottom line is this. We Albertans have contributed over $600 billion net to the rest of the Federation through our federal taxes and the whole system of fiscal federalism, including equalization. We're generous. We're proud to share some of our good wealth, some of our good fortune with other parts of the country when times are good here and bad elsewhere. But what we can no longer abide are politicians and governments benefiting from those transfers while doing everything they can to block us in and pin us down, not to allow us to get a fair global price. This was the point of my speech on Tuesday night. We want to develop a win-win that enhances all prosperity for all Canadians by being partners in responsible resource development. And that begins with our First Nations and the creation of an Aboriginal Opportunities Corporation that will assist them in having an ownership stake in pipelines and major energy infrastructure.
On the concerns around equalization, though, with respect, you were in Cabinet and had a chance to change the equalization formula. In fact, the last time it was updated was in 2009. Your government at the time didn't. Why not? And is it really unfair to now pin that so-called unfairness of the system on other parties?
Well, first of all, changes were actually made then that did reduce the increases. Secondly,
not the changes you're talking about now, though.
Well, no. But secondly, at that time, there was a energy boom happening in Alberta, and no other provinces nor were blocking pipelines. We had a federal government that was approving and overseeing the construction of pipelines. So we didn't have the same kind of fundamental unfairness. Everything has changed now. We are into 4 years of economic decline and stagnation in Alberta. We are desperate to get a fair price for our energy. We have a New Democrat government to our west, and unfortunately a Quebec government, and a government in Ottawa who have been undermining our ability to get a fair price. So this is totally changed, and that's why
there
we
were
think it's
also issues
reasonable
with
to
the
use
price,
this as
though,
a
in
point of.
2008.
That's why we think it's reasonable to use this as a point of leverage. We did not have, the Harper government oversaw the, approved 5 major pipelines, oversaw the construction of 4, which increased our takeaway capacity for Alberta oil by 1.72 million barrels per
the
day.
ones that you're talking about now, the ones you're saying you're threatening over now.
Because there were no coastal pipelines that came to the cabinet except for Northern Gateway, which was approved and subsequently vetoed by the Trudeau government. Here's the point. We now have politicians in other parts of the country who want our equalization transfers, but don't want to help us to get a fair price for the oil that pays for those transfers. We're simply asking for a fair deal, and that will be at the center of our government's agenda.
There were, with respect though, there were issues with Alberta's economy prior to 2009. They had gone through boom and bust cycles before. I take your point about the issue with pipelines, but I think there are people out there who find it a bit disingenuous that you had the opportunity to change things as a representative in cabinet, as a representative of Alberta, and you didn't.
Again, the equalization formula was changed repeatedly under the Harper government. You may recall Danny Williams protesting that by taking the Canadian flag off the Newfoundland legislature.
But not the changes that you're referring to now that address what you say is an inherent unfairness.
What I'm addressing is the broader issue, the bigger issue of provincial governments benefiting from transfers of wealth generated in Alberta while trying to prevent the development of that wealth. And that's why we're saying, look, we're not saying we're against equalization, Vasi. I've been clear about that from the beginning. We are proud to have helped to lift up Canadians through these transfers in the past. We're simply saying if you want to benefit from those that wealth, please help us to get a fair price for it. It's in everyone's interests.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Premier-designate Kenney. Appreciate your time today, and congratulations again.
Thanks for the questions, Vasi.